It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday morning at Westfield Private Airfield. The sun had just begun to warm the tarmac, and the smell of jet fuel hung in the air as ground crews prepared for the day's flights. Captain James Harrington arrived early as he always did, his worn leather flight bag slung over his shoulder. At 48, with salt and pepper hair and 15 years of flying experience, he was known among his peers for his unwavering dedication to protocol. "Morning, Cap," called out Miguel from the fuel truck. "Another day, another dollar?" James nodded with a tight smile. Another day, another set of pre-flight checks. He glanced at his watch. 6:45 a.m. Plenty of time before his 8:30 departure with one of Transglobal Airways' most important clients. In the terminal's private lounge, Eliza Washington was already reviewing quarterly projections on her tablet, while her assistant, Diane, confirmed their itinerary for the Renewable Energy Conference in Dubai. At 43, Eliza had built WashTech Innovations from nothing into a multi-billion-dollar green technology empire. Her latest breakthrough in affordable solar storage systems had made her not just wealthy, but influential in global energy policy. "The governor will meet us at the hotel before the opening ceremony," Diane said, scrolling through emails, and the ambassador called again. "He's eager to discuss the rural electrification project." Eliza nodded, her focus still on the spreadsheets. She'd grown up watching her mother work 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Now, as one of the few black women leading a Fortune 500 company, she never took a moment of her success for granted. "We should head to the plane," Diane said, checking her watch. The pilot sent word they're ready for boarding. Outside, James was completing his external inspection of the sleek Gulfstream G650, running his hand along the smooth white fuselage. Something about the maintenance log had been bothering him since he'd reviewed it that morning. The records showed all systems were normal, but the entry seemed rushed, with the signature of a technician he didn't recognize. He climbed aboard and greeted the flight attendant, Lisa Chen, who was arranging fresh flowers in the cabin. "Ms. Washington likes orchids," Lisa said with a smile. "Apparently she grows them herself." James nodded distractedly as he entered the cockpit. His co-pilot, Thomas Wells, was already there, running through the pre-flight checklist. "Everything good?" Thomas asked, noticing James's frown. "Did you see anything unusual in the maintenance log?" Thomas shrugged. "Looks standard to me, why?" Before James could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from ground control. "VIP arriving now." Through the cockpit window, James watched a black SUV pull up to the air stairs. The driver opened the door and Eliza Washington stepped out, dressed in a tailored navy suit, her natural hair framing her face in a halo of tight curls. She paused to thank the driver before heading toward the plane, Diane following with their carry-ons. Something made James get up from his seat. A feeling he couldn't shake. He stepped out of the cockpit just as Lisa was about to welcome the passengers aboard. "Ms. Washington," he said with a polite nod. "I'm Captain Harrington," Eliza smiled warmly. "Good morning, Captain. Perfect day for flying, isn't it?" James didn't return the smile. "I'm afraid there's been a slight delay. If you could return to the lounge for a moment, I need to verify something with maintenance." Eliza's smile faded. "A delay? My schedule is extremely tight." "What's the issue?" "Just a routine check, ma'am. Shouldn't take long." Diane stepped forward, her expression concerned. "We have meetings in Dubai that can't be rescheduled." "Is this really necessary?" "I'm afraid it is," James said firmly. "Aircraft safety isn't something I compromise on." Something in his tone made Eliza study him more carefully. "Is there something specific you're concerned about, Captain? Because if it's a minor issue, perhaps we could." "I cannot and will not fly this aircraft until I'm satisfied it meets all safety requirements," James interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "And I would appreciate it if you returned to the lounge while I sort this out." A tense silence fell. Lisa shifted uncomfortably beside them. "Are all your passengers asked to leave the aircraft for routine checks?" Eliza asked quietly. "Or am I receiving special treatment today?" James stiffened. "This has nothing to do with who you are, Ms. Washington. Doesn't it?" Eliza's voice remained calm, but her eyes had hardened. "Because in my experience, there's usually a reason when I'm suddenly denied access to spaces where others are welcome. This isn't about access. It's about safety," James insisted, feeling a flush of anger rise in his neck. Diane had pulled out her phone and was recording the interaction, "I think we should document this," she said. The co-pilot emerged from the cockpit. "James, what's going on?" "We're cleared for takeoff in 20 minutes. "Not anymore," James said without turning around. "Please contact ground control and tell them we have a situation." "This is ridiculous," Diane muttered, still filming. "Ms. Washington has flown on this exact plane a dozen times. And today she won't be," James said firmly.
"I'm exercising my authority as captain to refuse boarding for safety reasons." Eliza took a deep breath.
"Captain Harrington, I understand you have concerns, but I'm asking you to explain them clearly. What specific safety issue are you addressing?" James hesitated. The maintenance log didn't show anything concrete, just his gut feeling that something wasn't right. But that feeling had saved him more than once in his career. "The maintenance log is irregular," he finally said. "I need to speak with the technician who signed off on this aircraft." "Then make the call," Eliza challenged. "Let's resolve this now." "It's not that simple," James replied. "And I don't appreciate being pressured to ignore my professional judgment." By now, a small crowd had gathered at the bottom of the air stairs, ground crew curious about the delay, and 2 security officers responding to the co-pilot's call about a situation. "Is there a problem here?" asked one of the officers, climbing the stairs. "Yes," Diane answered before anyone else could speak. "Captain Harrington is refusing to allow Ms. Washington to board her own private jet without explanation." The officer looked confused. "Captain? Can you explain?" James felt cornered. He knew how this looked. A white pilot refusing service to a prominent black woman. But aircraft safety transcended everything else in his mind. "I have concerns about the airworthiness of this aircraft," he stated firmly. "As pilot in command, federal regulations give me final authority over its operation. I'm exercising that authority." Eliza's face was a mask of controlled anger. "I'll be speaking with Transglobal's CEO about this incident," she said quietly. "That's your right," James replied. "But I won't change my decision." Another security officer had joined them, along with the airfield manager, a nervous-looking man in a rumpled suit. "Ms. Washington," the manager said, "please accept our deepest apologies for this inconvenience. We can arrange another aircraft immediately." "That won't be necessary," Eliza said, her voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. "I'll be contacting my attorneys instead." She turned to face James directly. "Captain Harrington, I've built my career overcoming obstacles placed in my path. If safety is truly your concern, I respect that. But if this is something else, if you're using safety as a convenient excuse, know that I won't let it stand." James met her gaze steadily. "My only concern is the safety of everyone who flies on aircraft under my command. Nothing more, nothing less." Diane's phone was still recording as Eliza turned and descended the stairs with dignity intact. The gathered ground crew parted to let her pass, many looking down awkwardly, others glaring at James. Back in the terminal, phones were already buzzing as Diane's video began circulating among WashTec employees. Within an hour, it would reach social media. By evening, it would be national news. James watched the SUV drive away, a heavy weight settling in his stomach. He'd followed his instincts as he'd been trained to do. But as the airfield manager approached him with fury in his eyes, he wondered if this time, those instincts would cost him everything. "Captain Harrington," the manager hissed, "do you have any idea what you've just done? That woman is one of the most powerful people in the tech industry." James said nothing, turning back toward the cockpit. He had calls to make, to his union representative, to the maintenance chief, to his supervisor. But first he needed to check something. He knelt beside the right engine, running his hand along a seam that had caught his attention during pre-flight. His fingers came away with a trace of dark liquid, not fuel but hydraulic fluid. A small leak, easy to miss if you weren't looking carefully, easy to dismiss as insignificant, or easy to ignore if someone was in a hurry to get a VIP in the air. As James stared at the smear on his fingertips, a cold certainty settled over him. He'd made the right call. But as shouts echoed across the tarmac and his phone began to ring, he knew that being right might not be enough to save him from what was coming. By nightfall, the video had spread like wildfire. Millions had watched Diane's recording of Captain James Harrington refusing to let Eliza Washington board her own plane. News anchors across the country debated the incident, their chyrons blaring provocative questions. Discrimination at 30,000 feet? And Billionaire blocked safety concern or something else? In her downtown penthouse, Eliza stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights twinkling below as she spoke on the phone with her chief legal counsel, Raymond Torres. The airline's CEO called again, she said, watching her reflection in the glass. Third time today. They're offering a formal apology, sensitivity training for all staff, and a substantial donation to my foundation. They're scared, Raymond replied, as they should be. This kind of publicity is what companies dread. What do you want to do? Eliza turned from the window, glancing at the muted television where her face appeared beside Harrington's in a split-screen graphic. I want the truth. Not an apology, not money. Why did he really refuse to fly me? The court of public opinion has already decided, Raymond said. Your support is overwhelming, but litigation would be lengthy and I didn't build my company by taking shortcuts, Eliza interrupted. Something doesn't add up. The man looked scared, Ray, not hateful, scared. After hanging up, Eliza scrolled through messages on her phone, hundreds of supportive texts from friends, business associates, and fellow tech leaders. One caught her eye from the head of her board of directors. Emergency meeting called for tomorrow. Growing concerns about company image. Need to resolve this quickly. She tossed her phone aside with a sigh. 15 years building WashTech, revolutionizing solar energy technology, creating thousands of jobs, and suddenly her legacy might be defined by one confrontation on an airport tarmac. Across town, in a modest suburban home, James Harrington sat at his kitchen table, his untouched dinner growing cold. The blinds were drawn. His phone had been ringing nonstop until he'd finally turned it off. His wife, Grace, a pediatric nurse, sat across from him, worry etched on her face. They've suspended me, James said, staring at the official letter from Transglobal Airways. Pending investigation. My union rep says they're under enormous pressure. Did you tell them about the hydraulic fluid? Grace asked. I filed the report right away, but the maintenance chief claims it was within acceptable parameters. Said I overreacted. He ran a hand through his hair. Maybe I did. Grace reached across the table to take his hand. You've been flying for 15 years. You've never overreacted about safety? Not once. A sudden crash made them both jump, the sound of breaking glass from the front of the house. James was on his feet instantly, moving Grace behind him as he edged toward the living room. The front window was shattered, a brick lying amid the glass shards. Spray painted in red across the brick was a single word. Racist. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. I'm calling the police. As James stared at the brick, his phone dinged with an email notification. Automatically, he glanced at it. A message from an unknown sender with the subject line, You don't know the whole story. The next morning, Eliza arrived at the WashTech headquarters to find reporters camped outside. She navigated through them with practiced poise, offering only a brief no comment at this time as she entered the building. Her assistant met her at the elevator. The board's already in the conference room, Diane said, handing over a tablet. And this investigative journalist has been calling nonstop. Kai Chen from the Daily Observer. Says he has information about Harrington. Eliza scanned the message. Set up a call, she said as the elevator doors opened to the executive floor. In the conference room, the atmosphere was tense. 8 board members sat around the massive table, faces grave. Philip Blackwood, the chairman, spoke first. Eliza, we need to address this situation immediately. Our stock dropped 3 points yesterday. Partners are calling, asking if there's something they should know. Something they should know? Eliza repeated, taking her seat at the head of the table. Whether this incident suggests deeper problems, clarified Victoria Chen, head of investor relations. The narrative is already forming. Successful black woman targeted by prejudiced pilot. If we pursue this, it becomes our identity. So you want me to let it go, Eliza said flatly. Accept the airline's apology and donation and move on. It would be the prudent course, Philip agreed. Our Dubai contracts need your attention. The rural electrification project in Kenya can't afford delays. Is this really where your energy should be focused? Eliza looked around the table at the faces of people she'd handpicked for their expertise and vision. What if it happens again? To me, to someone else? Do we just accept that as the cost of doing business? We pick our battles, Victoria said gently. And right now, bringing affordable, renewable energy to millions seems more important than one unpleasant incident. The meeting continued for another hour, with the board ultimately voting to recommend accepting the airline's offer and issuing a joint statement about moving forward positively. Only one board member, Dr. Luis Ortega, abstained. As the room emptied, Luis lingered. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "my wife is a former air traffic controller. She says Harrington has a reputation as a safety fanatic, never takes chances, often requests extra inspections." Eliza nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Luis." Back in her office, Eliza connected with Kai Chen via video call. The journalist was younger than she expected, with intense eyes behind thick-framed glasses. "Ms. Washington, thank you for making time," he began. "I've been investigating Transglobal Airways for a story on airline safety standards. Your incident caught my attention because it fits a pattern." "What pattern?" "Captain Harrington has filed more safety reports than any other pilot in the company, by a wide margin. 3 of them specifically about your aircraft model." Eliza leaned forward. "My model specifically?" "The Gulfstream G650, Kai confirmed. He flagged potential issues with the hydraulic system 8 months ago, then again 4 months ago. Both times maintenance cleared the aircraft. Why didn't he just say that on the tarmac? "That's where it gets interesting," Kai said. "After his first report, he was called in by management and told to use proper channels and not alarm passengers with technical concerns. Essentially, they told him to keep quiet about potential issues until they were confirmed." Eliza sat back, processing this information. "Do you have documentation?" "Some. And a source inside Transglobal's maintenance division who's willing to talk anonymously." As the call ended, Eliza stared out her office window at the city skyline. The board wanted her to move on, to focus on business. The public had already cast James Harrington as the villain in a familiar story. What if they were all wrong? Meanwhile, James Harrington sat in a small cafe 3 blocks from his house, nervously checking his surroundings. Across from him was a man he'd never met before, Kai Chen from the Daily Observer. "I can't be seen talking to a journalist," James said quietly. "My union lawyer would have a fit." "I understand," Kai replied, sliding a folder across the table. "But I thought you should see these." Inside were maintenance records for the Gulfstream G650 fleet operated by Transglobal, including the one reserved for Eliza Washington. Several entries were highlighted: inspection dates, signed clearances, and follow-up notes. "The signatures don't match," Kai explained. "The same inspector supposedly cleared 3 different aircraft in 3 different cities within 2 hours. Physically impossible." James stared at the documents. "They're falsifying inspection records?" "For certain clients, it seems. High-priority customers who can't be delayed." Kai took back the folder. "Your hydraulic leak report from yesterday? Already resolved. No maintenance performed." The color drained from James's face. "That's not just unethical. It's criminal. Which is why I'm writing this story," Kai said. "But I need more. Someone with credibility to go on the record." James shook his head. "I can't. My home was vandalized last night. My wife is scared. Everyone thinks I'm just a bigot who wouldn't fly a black woman. Even Eliza Washington? Especially her. Why would she believe anything else?" As James left the cafe, his phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Captain Harrington?" A woman's voice, professional and measured. "This is Eliza Washington. I think we need to talk." That evening, in a private meeting room at a downtown law office, 2 people who had become unwilling symbols in a national conversation sat across from each other, both wary, both searching for truth. "Thank you for coming," Eliza began. James nodded stiffly. "Your assistant said you have questions about Transglobal's maintenance procedures." "I do," Eliza confirmed, sliding a tablet toward him. "My team found these discrepancies in the records. 3 different safety inspections supposedly conducted simultaneously in different cities." James glanced at the screen, unsurprised. "Kai Chen showed me similar documents. Why didn't you tell me about your concerns on the tarmac?" "About the hydraulic system specifically?" James met her eyes directly for the first time. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have seen it as an excuse?" The question hung in the air between them, honest, uncomfortable, and necessary. Outside the window, camera flashes occasionally lit up the street as journalists staked out the building, unaware that the 2 people at the center of their story were finally having the conversation they should have had from the beginning. "Would I have believed you?" Eliza repeated James's question, considering it carefully. "I don't know. But you never gave me the chance to try. James looked down at his hands. In 15 years of flying, I've learned that when something feels wrong in the air, you don't have time for debate. You act. We weren't in the air, Eliza pointed out. We were on the ground where talking is still an option. A tense silence filled the room. Through the window, the city lights blinked against the darkening sky. Neither had expected to find themselves here, searching for common ground in the eye of a media storm. The hydraulic fluid I found, James finally said. It wasn't just a small leak. The consistency was wrong, thinner than it should be. Possibly contaminated. In flight, that could mean complete system failure. And Transglobal cleared the plane anyway? James nodded grimly. Within hours. No parts replaced, just inspected and approved for service. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Eliza studied him, trying to separate the man from the narrative that had formed around him. Kai Chen mentioned you filed reports about my aircraft model before. What exactly were your concerns? James reached for his worn leather messenger bag and pulled out a notebook. I keep my own records, he explained, flipping through pages of handwritten notes. 3 times in the past year, I've documented abnormal pressure readings in the G650's hydraulic systems. Each time, maintenance claimed it was within acceptable parameters. But you disagreed. The parameters themselves aren't the issue. It's the pattern. Small inconsistencies that add up. He pushed the notebook toward her. Look at these readings. They shouldn't fluctuate like this, especially not consistently across multiple flights. Eliza wasn't a pilot or an engineer, but she understood data patterns. The numbers showed clear anomalies that repeated across different dates. I've shown these to the chief mechanic, James continued. He said I was being overly cautious. Maybe I am, but after what happened to Anna, I can't. He stopped abruptly. Anna, Eliza prompted gently. James closed the notebook, his jaw tight. My sister. She was a flight attendant for Pacific Airways. 6 years ago, her plane went down over Colorado. Equipment failure. The investigation found maintenance records had been falsified for months. Understanding dawned on Eliza's face. I remember that crash. 47 people died. 48, James corrected quietly. They found out later that a passenger had brought their child on board without a ticket. A little boy just 4 years old. The weight of his words hung in the air. Eliza thought of the video that had gone viral. How easy it had been for viewers to see only a white pilot discriminating against a black passenger. How neatly it fit a familiar story. How wrong that simplicity now seemed. I need to see the plane, she decided suddenly. Your concerns might be valid, but I want to verify them myself. James looked surprised. Transglobal won't allow that. The aircraft is their property. A small smile played across Eliza's lips. The plane is leased exclusively to WashTec. And while I don't pilot aircraft, I do employ some of the best engineers in the country. She reached for her phone. Give me 24 hours. The next morning, at a small private airfield outside the city, Eliza's car pulled up beside a nondescript hangar. James was already waiting, looking nervous as he paced beside his own vehicle. How did you manage this? He asked as she approached. I told Transglobal I wanted my personal engineers to inspect the aircraft before I would consider flying with them again, she explained. Given the circumstances, they were eager to accommodate. A man in coveralls slid open the hangar door, revealing the sleek Gulfstream jet inside. He nodded respectfully to Eliza. Everything's ready, Ms. Washington. Thank you, Leo. She turned to James. This is Dr. Leonard Chen, head of mechanical engineering at WashTec. He's brought some colleagues to examine the aircraft. Inside the hangar, 3 other engineers were already at work, examining different parts of the plane with meticulous attention. Leo led Eliza and James toward the right wing. We've been at it since dawn, he explained, and there are definitely issues with the hydraulic system. The fluid is contaminated, mixed with another substance that thins it considerably. Could it be accidental? Eliza asked. Leo shook his head. Not likely. The contamination is too uniform. Someone deliberately added this substance, probably to mask a more serious problem with the system. James's expression darkened. They're hiding a major fault. If the hydraulics failed mid-flight, catastrophic, Leo finished for him. Especially over water or mountains. One of the other engineers called Leo over, pointing to something beneath the aircraft. As they consulted in hushed tones, Eliza turned to James. You were right, she said simply. The admission hung between them. an acknowledgement that transcended the narrative that had consumed their lives for the past 2 days. Leo returned, his expression grave. We found something else. The maintenance records show the hydraulic pump was replaced 3 months ago. But the serial number doesn't match. This pump is at least 2 years old with significant wear. They faked the replacement, James said, anger rising in his voice. And charged me for it, Eliza added, equally furious. I sign off on all maintenance expenses. This replacement cost over $120,000. Leo handed her a tablet showing close-up images of the worn components. There's more. We've found evidence of shortcuts in at least 4 critical systems. Whoever's been maintaining this aircraft has been gambling with lives to save time and money. As the engineers continued their inspection, Eliza pulled James aside. I owe you an apology. You were trying to protect everyone on that plane, including me. James shook his head. You had no way of knowing. The system is designed to hide these problems. Still, she insisted, I made assumptions about your motives. So did everyone else. A notification chimed on her phone, a message from Diane. The board was demanding an update on the situation. Public interest in the story wasn't dying down. If anything, the speculation was growing more heated. We need to go public with this, Eliza decided. Not just for us, but for everyone who flies. James looked uncertain. Transglobal will fight back. They'll claim we're trying to distract from the original incident. Then we need irrefutable proof. She turned to Leo. How long will your inspection take? Another few hours to document everything properly. Do it, she ordered. I want every issue photographed, measured, and compared to maintenance records. And I want it all verified by an independent third party. She looked at James. Know any retired FAA inspectors who can't be bought? For the first time since they'd met, James smiled. As a matter of fact, I do. By late afternoon, the hangar had become an impromptu investigation headquarters. Walter Gaines, a former FAA safety inspector with 30 years of experience, moved methodically around the aircraft, verifying each finding. His weathered face betrayed no emotion as he examined the evidence, but his occasional headshakes told their own story. Meanwhile, Eliza sat in a folding chair, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke with Raymond Torres, her chief counsel. Yes, I understand the legal implications, but this goes beyond me or Captain Harrington. This is criminal negligence. Across from her, James was reviewing the maintenance records again, this time with Kai Chen at his side. The journalist's fingers flew across his keyboard as James pointed out discrepancies. The same pattern appears in records for other aircraft in their fleet, Kai noted. This isn't isolated to your plane. Walter Gaines finally approached, wiping his hands on a rag. His expression was solemn as he addressed them both. In 40 years of aviation, I've seen corners cut. I've seen mistakes covered up. But this, he gestured toward the aircraft, this is deliberate endangerment. Someone decided that on-time departures for VIP clients mattered more than whether those clients arrived alive. Will you testify to that? Eliza asked. The old inspector nodded. Try to stop me. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the hangar doors, the group gathered around a small table. The evidence was overwhelming. Falsified records, substandard parts, hidden defects, all covered up with fraudulent inspections. If we take this public, James said, it won't just be about discrimination anymore. It'll be about corporate negligence and corruption. Good, Eliza replied firmly, because that's the real story here. Kai looked up from his notes. Transglobal will claim you're colluding to shift the narrative. They'll say you, he nodded to James, are trying to justify your actions after the fact. Let them, Eliza said. We have the truth and the evidence to support it. As they prepared to leave, James paused beside the aircraft that had brought them together in such unexpected circumstances. He placed a hand on the fuselage, thinking of his sister and the 47 others who had died because someone decided safety checks were an unnecessary expense. Eliza joined him, following his gaze. What are you thinking? That sometimes doing the right thing looks wrong until the whole story comes out, he answered. And sometimes the stories we think we know are just the beginning of something much bigger. Outside the hangar, the first news vans were already arriving, tipped off about the inspection. The next chapter of their story was about to begin, one that would challenge not just an airline but an entire industry's culture of silence. Camera lights flooded the hangar entrance as Eliza and James stepped outside. The media had assembled with remarkable speed. A forest of microphones and lenses now confronted them. In the harsh glare, they exchanged a look of silent understanding. Whatever happened next, there was no turning back. Ms. Washington, is it true you're defending the pilot who discriminated against you? Captain Harrington, are you standing by your decision to remove Ms. Washington from her plane? The questions came rapid fire, overlapping in their urgency. Eliza raised a hand and the crowd quieted slightly. She had faced press conferences countless times, but never like this, never with so much at stake beyond her company's bottom line. 2 days ago, she began, her voice steady. I believed I was the victim of discrimination when Captain Harrington refused to allow me to board my plane. That video, which many of you have seen, told a compelling but incomplete story. She gestured toward James, who stood tall despite the clear discomfort on his face. Captain Harrington acted out of concern for passenger safety, my safety. Today, with the help of independent engineers and a former FAA inspector, we've discovered his concerns were not only valid but potentially life-saving. A murmur rippled through the gathered reporters. The aircraft I was about to board had multiple serious safety issues deliberately concealed by falsified maintenance records, Eliza continued. We have documented evidence of systemic negligence that put lives at risk for the sake of convenience and profit. James stepped forward, his voice less practiced, but equally determined. This isn't about one plane or one flight. We've uncovered a pattern of negligence affecting multiple aircraft in TransGlobal's fleet. Kai Chen moved through the crowd, his press credentials visible. Captain Harrington, is it true that you previously reported concerns about this specific aircraft model and were ignored? Yes, James confirmed. 3 times in the past year. Each time, my concerns were dismissed and the records were altered to show all systems functioning normally. Ms. Washington, called another reporter. Do you believe racism played no part in this incident? Eliza didn't flinch. What I believe is that we've been asking the wrong questions. The real story here isn't about one confrontation between a white pilot and a black passenger. It's about an aviation company willing to risk lives, all lives, to maintain their schedule and their profit margins. As questions continued to fly, Raymond Torres pushed through the crowd to reach Eliza's side. He whispered urgently in her ear, TransGlobal's lawyers just called. They're threatening legal action if you continue making these allegations public. Eliza's expression hardened. Tell them I look forward to discovery, she responded, just loud enough for nearby microphones to catch. The press conference continued for another 20 minutes, with Walter Gaines eventually joining to lend his considerable authority to their claims. By the time they retreated to their vehicles, the story had already evolved far beyond its original framing. Social media was erupting with new hashtags. Fly safe and our TransGlobal truths replacing the previous flying while black. In the privacy of her car, Eliza finally let exhaustion show on her face. That went better than expected, she said to Raymond, who sat across from her checking incoming messages on his tablet. The initial public response is mixed, he reported. Many are calling you brave for speaking out. Others think this is a convenient cover-up for Harrington. And the board? Raymond winced slightly. Emergency meeting called for 8 a.m. tomorrow. Philip Blackwood is not pleased. He's afraid of the legal exposure, Eliza said with a sigh. What about our Dubai partners? Concerned but waiting to see how this plays out. Raymond hesitated. Eliza, TransGlobal isn't going to back down. They're already spinning this as a publicity stunt, claiming you're using your influence to distract from a simple misunderstanding. Eliza looked out at the darkened city streets as they drove. Let them try. The evidence speaks for itself. Across town, James returned home to find his wife waiting anxiously. The street outside was quiet. No journalists, no protesters. Not yet, anyway. I saw you on the news, Grace said, embracing him tightly. You were brave. Or foolish, James replied, his voice muffled against her shoulder. TransGlobal's lawyers will come after us with everything they have. Grace pulled back to look him in the eyes. Do you regret it? Standing up to them? James thought about the worn hydraulic pump, the contaminated fluid, the falsified records, all the corners cut that might have led to disaster. No, he said firmly. Not for a second. His phone buzzed with a text from his union representative. Emergency meeting tomorrow. Board wants your side of the story. Bring all documentation. At least someone was willing to listen. The next morning broke with the story splashed across every major news outlet. Aviation experts were being interviewed about maintenance standards. Former TransGlobal employees were coming forward with their own stories of pressure to cut corners, and the company's stock was in freefall. In the WashTech boardroom, the atmosphere was tense as Eliza faced her directors. Philip Blackwood paced at the head of the table, his usual composed demeanor fractured by anger. "You've put this company in an impossible position," he said, gesturing to the financial reports displayed on the wall screen. "Our partners are nervous, investors are calling, and TransGlobal has already filed notice of intent to sue for defamation and breach of contract." "They won't win," Eliza replied calmly. "The evidence is solid. That's not the point." Philip slammed his hand on the table. "We're a technology company, not an aviation watchdog. This crusade of yours has nothing to do with our core business." Victoria Chen nodded in agreement. "The Dubai contracts are now on hold. The Kenya project partners are questioning our focus. This is exactly what we warned you about. One incident becoming our entire identity." Eliza looked around the table at the concerned faces. Only Luis Ortega seemed supportive, offering a slight nod of encouragement. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice quiet but firm. WashTech was founded on two core principles: innovation and integrity. We can't claim to care about improving lives through technology if we're willing to look the other way when lives are endangered by corporate negligence. "Noble sentiments," Philip responded coldly, "but the board has a fiduciary responsibility to this company and its shareholders. And I have a responsibility to do what's right," Eliza countered. "If that means stepping down as CEO, I'm prepared to do so." A shocked silence fell over the room. No one had expected her to put her position on the line. Before anyone could respond, Diane burst into the room, tablet in hand. "You need to see this," she said urgently, placing the device in front of Eliza. On the screen was breaking news. The FAA had just announced an emergency inspection of all TransGlobal Airways aircraft following the allegations. More significantly, a whistleblower from within TransGlobal had come forward with internal emails explicitly directing maintenance crews to expedite inspections for VIP clients and prioritize schedule adherence over non-critical maintenance. The board members crowded around to read the report. Philip's face paled. "This changes things," Victoria admitted. Luis spoke up for the first time. "If we back down now, we're complicit. The story isn't going away, it's getting bigger. We need to be on the right side of it." Meanwhile, in the union hall across town, James sat before a panel of senior pilots and union officials. He had spent the morning walking them through his documentation, explaining each discrepancy and safety concern in meticulous detail. The union president, a veteran pilot with 30 years of experience, studied the evidence with a grim expression. "These hydraulic issues match problems I've encountered myself," he acknowledged. "I filed reports too. Nothing ever came of them." Another pilot nodded. "Same with the electrical system glitches on the 737 fleet. Reported 3 times, cleared 3 times with no actual repairs." One by one, pilots around the table began sharing similar stories. Safety concerns dismissed, maintenance records that didn't match reality, pressure to keep planes in the air regardless of warning signs. What had begun as James's individual stand was revealing a cultural problem that extended far beyond one company or one aircraft. As the meeting concluded, James received a text from Eliza. "FAA launching investigation." Whistleblower came forward with emails. "We're winning." For the first time in days, James felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The truth was coming out regardless of how powerful the forces aligned against it. That evening, James and Eliza met again, this time at her office high above the city. The space was elegant but functional, with clean lines and large windows offering a panoramic view of the skyline now lit against the night sky. "The FAA has grounded TransGlobal's entire G650 fleet for inspection," Eliza reported, handing James a cup of coffee. "And 3 other airlines have voluntarily pulled similar models for review." "It's a start," James said. "But this problem goes deeper than one model or one company. It's an industry culture that values schedules over safety." Eliza nodded thoughtfully. "Which is why we need to think bigger." She gestured toward her computer screen where a draft proposal was displayed. What if we created an independent whistleblower protection program, specifically for aviation safety? Funded by my foundation but operated independently, with direct channels to regulators. James studied the concept, impressed by its scope. You'd need buy-in from pilots' unions, mechanics associations, and ideally some progressive airlines willing to change. I have the connections, Eliza said. And now, thanks to you, I have the motivation. Their unexpected alliance, born from conflict and strengthened by a shared commitment to truth, was evolving into something neither could have anticipated, a potential force for systemic change in an industry resistant to outside scrutiny. Outside, the city continued its rhythmic pulse of light and movement, unaware that in this quiet office, two unlikely allies were laying the groundwork for a transformation that would eventually save countless lives. 1 year later, the conference hall buzzed with energy as hundreds of aviation professionals filled the seats. Pilots in uniform sat beside mechanics in work shirts, flight attendants next to safety inspectors. On stage, a simple podium stood flanked by 2 chairs, a banner overhead reading, First Annual Aviation Safety Summit, Building a Culture of Transparency. In the front row, Grace Harrington squeezed her husband's hand as they waited for the program to begin. "Nervous?" she whispered. James shook his head, though the slight adjustment of his tie suggested otherwise. Just still getting used to being on this side of things. The past year had transformed their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The night terrors that had plagued James since his sister's death had finally begun to fade. The brick that had shattered their window was now displayed in his office, a reminder of how quickly judgment can come, and how important it is to stand firm anyway. At the back of the hall, Raymond Torres surveyed the crowd with satisfaction. "Full house," he noted as Eliza Washington joined him. "Your foundation pulled it off." Eliza nodded, taking in the scene with quiet pride. "We're just getting started." The journey to this moment had been neither quick nor easy. Transglobal Airways had fought back hard as expected. Their initial lawsuit claiming defamation had been followed by a smear campaign painting Eliza and James as opportunists, exploiting racial tensions for personal gain. The pressure had been intense. James had been fired, his reputation within the industry temporarily poisoned. Eliza had faced a no-confidence vote from her board, surviving by the narrowest of margins. For weeks, both had weathered personal attacks, their motives questioned, their integrity challenged, but the evidence had been impossible to dismiss. The FAA's emergency inspections had uncovered safety violations in 23 transglobal aircraft, including 5 with the exact hydraulic system defects James had documented. The whistleblower emails had revealed a systematic practice of rushing maintenance on VIP aircraft, with executives explicitly prioritizing schedule adherence over thorough safety. Checks most damning of all had been the discovery of a buried internal report acknowledging the risk but calculating that the cost of delays would exceed potential liability from an incident, essentially putting a price tag on passenger lives. The lights dimmed, bringing Eliza back to the present moment. A hush fell over the audience as the moderator approached the podium. "Welcome to the first annual Aviation Safety Summit," she began. "A year ago, few would have predicted we'd be here today. But sometimes change begins with a single act of courage." Video screens on either side of the stage lit up with now familiar images. James refusing to allow Eliza to board her plane. The viral confrontation that had initially been framed as discrimination. The press conference where they'd revealed the truth together. The congressional hearings that had followed. "Please welcome our keynote speakers," the moderator continued. "The unlikely allies whose stand for safety has transformed an industry. WashTech CEO Eliza Washington and Captain James Harrington, now director of the Aviation Safety Whistleblower Protection Program." Applause filled the hall as Eliza and James made their way to the stage. They shook hands warmly before taking their places at the podium. James spoke first, his voice stronger and more confident than it had been a year ago. "When I refused to fly Ms. Washington's plane that day, I was thinking of my sister Anna and the 47 others who died because someone decided thorough safety checks were too expensive and too time-consuming. I never imagined that decision would lead to where we are today." He looked out at the sea of faces, many of them pilots who had initially condemned him, now understanding his actions in a completely different light. In the past year,
The Aviation Safety Whistleblower Protection Program has received over 300 reports from mechanics,
pilots and ground crew across 42 different airlines. Every single report has been investigated. 78% have resulted in actual safety improvements. Eliza stepped forward. The program works because it protects those who speak up. Whistleblowers can report concerns anonymously through encrypted channels. Their identities are shielded by the strongest legal protections we could establish, and they have direct access to independent inspectors who answer to safety standards, not corporate schedules. The audience listened intently as they outlined the program's achievements. 6 airlines had adopted new maintenance verification protocols. 3 manufacturers had revised their component testing procedures. And most significantly, the FAA had implemented stricter oversight requirements for private and corporate aircraft. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Eliza continued. The real change is cultural. More and more aviation professionals are recognizing that true loyalty to their companies means speaking up when safety is compromised, not looking the other way. As James returned to the podium, he noticed a woman in the 3rd row, the flight attendant who had been preparing his plane the day of the incident. Lisa Chen had later become one of the program's earliest whistleblowers, reporting similar maintenance irregularities on other aircraft. She gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. "I lost my job for doing what I believed was right," James said. "Many of you in this room have faced similar choices, moments when professional obligation collided with personal integrity. What we're building together is a system where those shouldn't be opposing forces." After their presentation, a question and answer session brought forward perspectives from across the industry. A maintenance supervisor described how the program had helped identify a pattern of defects in a widely used component. A pilot shared how she had used the anonymous reporting system to flag training deficiencies without fear of retaliation. The most powerful moment came when an older man approached the microphone, his hand slightly shaking. "My name is Howard Daniels. I was senior mechanic at Pacific Airways when Flight 2273 went down 6 years ago, the crash that killed Anna Harrington and 47 others." A hush fell over the room. James stiffened in his chair. "I knew there were problems with that aircraft," Howard continued, his voice breaking. "We all did. But reporting it meant risking our jobs, and we had families to feed." He wiped at his eyes. "Not a day goes by that I don't regret my silence. What you've created here, this program, it would have saved those lives. It would have saved my conscience." From the back of the hall, Raymond nudged Eliza and nodded toward the entrance. Philip Blackwood had slipped into the conference, standing quietly against the wall. The board chairman had been the last holdout, convinced the Foundation's focus on aviation safety was a distraction from WashTech's core mission. His presence suggested a shift. As the formal program concluded, attendees gathered in small groups, exchanging experiences and contact information. What had begun as a response to a specific incident was evolving into a movement, a community of professionals committed to transparency across the industry. Eliza found James near the refreshment table, deep in conversation with Howard Daniels. She waited respectfully at a distance until James noticed her and waved her over. The 2 men had tears in their eyes. "Howard was just telling me about Anna," James explained. "They used to trade crossword puzzles on long flights. She would be so proud of you," Howard said, squeezing James's shoulder before excusing himself. Eliza watched him go. "Moments like that make all the battles worthwhile," James nodded. "When I refused to fly your plane that day, all I was thinking about was preventing another tragedy. I never imagined we'd end up changing the system that allowed my sister's crash to happen." "That's how real change works," Eliza replied. "It starts with one person refusing to look the other way, even when it would be easier." She glanced toward Philip, now talking with Raymond across the room. "Even my skeptics are coming around. The Foundation's work is being studied as a model for other industries." Later that evening, as the conference wound down, Eliza and James found themselves alone on the venue's terrace, looking out over the city lights. The same skyline they had viewed from her office a year earlier, though everything else had changed. "We're not done," James said, more statement than question. Eliza shook her head. "The reporting system is working, but we're still fighting the culture that makes whistleblowing necessary in the first place. That's a longer battle, but worth fighting. Always." In the distance, an aircraft climbed steadily into the night sky, its lights blinking against the darkness. They watched it in companionable silence, two unlikely allies brought together by a moment of conflict that had revealed a deeper truth, that sometimes the most courageous act isn't standing up to a